I was about 5 or 6 years old, a young little person here on this world. I think I was always a sensitive child. I think children are mostly sensitive. Maybe I was more than others, or maybe I was just more isolated. So I'm 5 or 6, and I'm in my house as I grew up, an old farmhouse. And, I sort of was having these small, I guess, looking back now, mystical experiences, out of body experiences. But I just remember just standing there in the kitchen, and something happened. And what it was sort of the idea of reality became coming through my head, coming through my brain, being reality. What is, I guess, in some ways, the fabric of reality? What is reality? What's possible? What's kind of stuff? And all of a sudden, my mind starts spinning very quickly about this, and energy starts to, it's building up in my body, and I'm getting freaked out. The idea that reality was sort of a medium that was malleable, much like the rest of the material world that I was dealing with, became very apparent, and it was starting to change. So I move to another room. It's very dark, and the energy is building and building, and I start to bolt. I'm just like, I gotta bolt. I gotta get out of here. This is too intense. And I open up the front door. I remember this, just like pushing open the front door. And it is a bright, sunny summer day. And so the sun at that moment completely hits me. And I am instantaneously and immediately shot out of my body and sent to another dimension. Now, the cord from my child body to my spirit body was still there. So I was experiencing a bilocation in a lot of ways. And it's pretty interesting. As I was having these experiences, I became aware that these two worlds were connected, and that in some sense, this one world that is in the spirit world was, I guess, at the time, my mind made it seem like it was an insane asylum, and that I was truly there, and my mind was projecting down to the earth, and everything I was doing up there was actually the real reality, and then the body below was sort of just this projection. And so as I was moving down through the small false world, I had to be in some ways restrained up in there, because I was unable to act out. There was some strange disconnect. At that point, I started cycling through these ideas, and then there started to become different manifestations through it. And my mother's a very Christian and spiritual lady, so the idea of the Christ started to also permeate my brain. This idea of the light and the Christ and ascension and this type of thing started to come in me. And I think at that point it was just too much, totally too much for myself. Depending on your metaphysical template, probably an ego death experience was about to happen. If the Christ appears, that's usually an ego death experience. And as that was happening to me, I completely lost control of all my bowels and just relieved myself in where I was. And then I just remember stumbling out into the grass and collapsing down. And as I collapsed down, there was a blade of grass. This is vivid in my mind, how many ever years later, as from a young child, of a blade of grass. And there was an insect, crawling on this blade of grass. Now, and then as my mind started to go, I started to project down into the micro. And I completely traveled down to the cellular level and touched something, and then went completely back out, and then shot out to the cosmic level. And after that, everything else is blurry. I just remember those events, and there's big blocks of time that was just kind of like black in my mind. I'm sure there's a lot of information and experience that was downloaded in my nervous system. And it's interesting because that was, I was young, and that sort of set the stage for me to become really interested in consciousness of what happened. So I kind of viewed that experience as everything that's happened to me afterwards, of just sort of like trying to, in some ways, process that, relive that, understand what that means to life. I don't think I really expressed that to the people around me, which was like my mother, father, and brother. My mother, when I talked to her about these kinds of things, she was like, oh yeah, you would wake up in the middle of the night and run out in the yard and the field and stuff. There's always sort of like, I would have these strange events that was kind of strange, being like jumping out of time and space. And so I don't remember that I really started deeply sharing that with people till I was much later. But these types of events kept happening throughout my childhood. And when I eventually, they gave us the scare story about LSD in 4th grade, there was like a major bell going off inside of my head that like there was a tool that actually facilitated and generated these types of experiences. So that was really interesting to me.